everyone, my name is Khan. This will be my first fully realized piece that I hope to air. So for this piece, I interviewed one of my friends, Ashwini Premashankar. She also goes by Ash, which is what I call her throughout the piece. We're both Sri Lankan. I was born in Sri Lanka, she was born in Sri Lanka, but she's an international student from there, and I spent most of my growing up in Canada, so we have had very different life experiences. So first, I asked her a couple of questions about herself and her experiences here and how she sees things. Then we chat a bit about alcohol culture in Sri Lanka versus here in Canada. She has some interesting perspectives to share. Lastly, I ask about her best experience here at the UofA and about what advice she would have given to the younger version of herself with what she knows now. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoy. Thanks. So I'm here with Ashwini Premashankar, an honors molecular genetics student here at the UofA, who also happens to be an international student from Sri Lanka. Hi, Ash.
Hey!
So where in Sri Lanka are you from?
I'm from Colombo, so that's technically the commercial capital, so it's the big city there.
So today I hope to talk to you about your experiences here as an international student. So why did you choose the UofA?
Oh, so I wanted to get into research. Sri Lanka doesn't cater to research that much, so I didn't really have an opportunity to go to Sri Lankan universities anyway. And the only universities I could look at were abroad, and my parents wanted me to go to Canada, so the country was chosen for me. And then in Canada, I had two options. I just decided to take UofA because UofA specializes in research and they give a lot of importance to it, and they give a lot of importance to undergrad research. And that's what I wanted because I need to make sure that I have enough research experience going in just so that I can be sure that this is what I want to do for the rest of my life.
And what is it that you want to do for the rest of your life?
So as of right now, I want to get into academia, probably become a professor and continue research. I'm also thinking about astrobiology as a career option, but that's I'm not really sure because it's a very limited field, and if you're going in, you have very few job opportunities in general. So I'm keeping it open right now. So it's definitely going to be research though, but just what field, I'm not really sure. Probably going to continue with genetics and biochem, maybe.
That's very cool. Was it a culture shock for you when you came to Canada to study?
No, not really. Okay, I think it would have been a culture shock if I hadn't known what it was like here, but I feel like I already did. So it wasn't like I went through things I did not expect to go through. Like everything that was happening here, I already knew. So it wasn't shocking per se. It was different, but it wasn't shocking.
And how did you know what it was like here?
Well, so in Sri Lanka, I was privileged enough to go to a private school, so a lot of what we did in school was quite westernized. I lived in a westernized society because I do come from Colombo, so I was exposed to a lot of Western things in Sri Lanka just because I came from Colombo. So because of that, coming to another country that was, well, a Western country wasn't that big of a deal because it was almost the same thing. Because, I used to talk in English all the time in Sri Lanka, so coming here and talking English again, not a big deal. And I think the only big difference would be safety and, moving around and stuff. But apart from that, not really. Everything else is the same.
That's very interesting. So what would you say the biggest difference you've noticed is from here compared to there?
Oh, I have a lot more freedom here. Not just because I live alone and that I used to live with my parents. It's just that, for example, I can't go out at night at 12 o'clock in Sri Lanka. That's not allowed. When you do go out at night, you need to make sure you have transport back home. Like my parents would make sure that I had transport back home, and who am I coming with? And if I'm taking an Uber, are you the last person in the Uber? None of that was allowed. So you need to make sure where you are going, and you need to make sure you transport to and back if you're coming at 12 maybe. And there was no way you could walk in the night or take public transport. That's not a thing you did if you were a woman, that is. it was allowed for men. My brother used to do it all the time. He started going out at 12 o'clock in the night at like 14, and he was fine. I was 20, and I still wasn't allowed to do that. So that's probably the biggest difference I see here, because here I have used public transport at 12 in the night, and I've felt completely safe. And I have walked back home alone at like 1 sometimes, and I've still felt safe. I'm not saying it is safe, it's just relatively safer than Sri Lanka. So for a person who grew up in Sri Lanka, this feels very safe.
Yeah, that makes sense. How have you made connections here and friendships here?
Oh, so I'm an introvert. That was actually one of the reasons why I chose U of A as well, I suppose. I know quite a few people in Toronto. I didn't want to go to a place where I knew people because I wasn't going to push myself out of the shell that I was living in. And I needed to do that because in science, you need to network. So when I first came here, I knew nobody. And I think I made 2 friends in my first chem class, I think Chem 101. And it was mostly because everything was, well, Chem 101 was really a relatively easy subject for me as an international student because we've done all of that in high school for us, and everybody else is struggling. So it was quite easy for me to make friends because a lot of people depended on me to get them through whatever and explain stuff. So I've been friends with them now for like quite a while, but everything else, I think it took me like an year to properly make good friends. Like all the good friends that I have now, it took me a year to make, like, because you start networking with like clubs and stuff like that, and that's when you make like really good friends.
So you're involved in some clubs. Can you tell me what they are?
Sure. So I volunteer with WISE, which is Women in Science and Engineering, and I also volunteer with FAC, which is Friends Across Campus. And yeah, so those are the 2 main clubs that I'm actually involved with.
That's awesome. So would you say that U of A does a lot to cater for international students making connections with domestic students?
Yeah, they do. So it's called a peer program. Essentially, you're paired up with an international student who's already here, and he or she basically takes you out and shows you around Edmonton and all of that stuff, and you have like trips that the peer program organizes to help you, I don't know, I guess understand Canadian culture, and you have like skiing trips and stuff like that you can sign up for. So yeah, so you also get to meet other international students, and you kind of get to know about Edmonton and stuff like that. So U of A has a lot of things, if you use them correctly, to make sure that you can acclimate well in Edmonton and make friends. Like, that's not a problem at all.
I'm really glad that the U of A has those opportunities. Another thing I wanted to chat with you about is maybe alcohol culture in here, in Canada, in Edmonton, in the U of A, versus in Sri Lanka, where you're from. I know that BBC put out an article that said that in 1955 they made a ban on women buying alcohol. Mm-hmm. And then they recently, in early 2018, they lifted the ban, but only to reinstate it a couple days later. What are your thoughts on this?
Okay, so until 2018, I don't think anybody in Sri Lanka knew that said ban existed. I don't think shops knew bans like that existed, because I know for sure, because I bought alcohol. I bought beer with my friend in a shop. Sure, you're judged a lot because you're a woman and Sri Lankan women do not drink. And when we bought, I think it was at a supermarket, and we were buying cheap beer because we were celebrating. And so we thought the best way to celebrate would be to, I don't know, drink beer. So we went and we decided to buy a beer. Bottle, I guess? Can. And then the entire supermarket just proceeded to stare at us throughout the entire procedure. And we had to rush out of the supermarket because everybody was just giving us this extremely judgmental look. And the beer tasted horrible, so it wasn't even worth it. But so Sri Lankan women do not have an alcohol culture. You just don't drink unless you are rich enough to afford it. So the places I drank were, so not at home, my parents weren't particularly open with me drinking, but I did drink at my friends' places. That was perfectly all right, as long as my parents did know that I was drinking, so it wasn't like they didn't. But that was also because I come from an extremely privileged family. A lot of Sri Lankan women, I think, of lower classes maybe, definitely aren't allowed to drink. It's not something you do. It brings dishonor, I suppose, to the family according to our culture. I obviously do not agree with that, but yeah, so nobody actually knew about said ban because, well, nobody actually did anything about it, but also Sri Lankan women in general just didn't drink, except for, I would argue, the 2% of the population that was rich enough to afford it. But right then, and then in 2018, I think I was in UofA during that time when they had the ban reinstated. That's when I knew said ban existed. I was like, oh, didn't know that was true. And then I think 2 days later, our president was like, we can't do that. The women are the stepping stones of our family or something like that. And so, if the woman's honor is destroyed, what's going to happen to the family? So we're going to bring back the ban. And I remember really well because a bunch of teachers, I think there was a teachers association that wrote a petition supporting bringing back the ban and all of that. And I remember being so mad because said ban shouldn't exist. And it's not just, I think, purchasing alcohol, it's also working at bars. Like women aren't allowed to work at bars and stuff like that. So you shouldn't be at any point controlling what a woman does, regardless of what it is, alcohol or otherwise. And it's very controlling, right? Why would you tell a woman where to work and where not to work? Like, we already don't have enough job opportunities in Sri Lanka. Like, just open it up a little bit. It's not going to bring dishonor, I think, at least. And so I obviously disagree with it. I think as a country and as a culture, we need to do better. And maybe stop with the stigmatization of drinking alcohol. Like, men are allowed to do it. It's not frowned upon when men do it, so why frown upon it just because a person has a uterus? It doesn't really make a difference.
I think that's a very well-formulated opinion, honestly. Like, obviously, you've thought about this.
I think what's important to note is that so we have an alcohol culture in the campus, right? People drink. Like, I've drunk a lot.
In Sri Lanka?
No, in Canada. So everybody drinks and everybody gets drunk, everybody gets passed out, most if you choose to, that is. So that is normal here. In Sri Lankan campuses, that is not normal. Sri Lankan campuses, because my friends go and also my brother's going right now, so you have a dress code for women. You're not allowed to wear certain things. You're most definitely not allowed to wear sleeveless. Sometimes you're not allowed to wear strap dresses or whatever. I don't think they have a code for drinking, but it's assumed that you do not drink in Sri Lanka. And I'm not sure it's the same for men, but women are just not allowed to drink on campus. That's not something. We do not have an alcohol culture in campus at all in Sri Lanka.
That's very interesting. Was that surprising to you then when you came, or was it something that you knew about from before?
Oh, I knew that. Like, that's not shocking, is it? It's not far-fetched to think people above the legal age would drink. Like, why would you not? So, no, I'm not. I wasn't surprised at all. I was more surprised because I didn't know Sri Lankan culture. I didn't know all the restrictions that Sri Lankan universities had. So I was more shocked when my friends told me they couldn't do stuff like that than I was when I came here and found out that everybody drank, because that was normal for me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I'm glad that it wasn't too much of a shock to you, because I know when I came to university, I hadn't drank at all before in high school. And none of my friends drank, so it was kind of a bit of a shock to me that everybody in Lister, at least in Lister, drank and, did the whole...
Not just the glass at all?
Yeah, no, I hadn't drank at all. Maybe I had a taste of my dad's beer and I was like, gross. So... It was quite a shock for me, so I'm glad that it wasn't too bad for you as someone new to the country.
But I also have to point out that I grew up in a society that's not representative of Sri Lankan society in general. I went to a private school. Lots of people who came there were rich. We could afford alcohol. And when we went to parents' houses or like our friends' houses, our parties are sophisticated to the point where everybody just serves wine, and as long as you were above 18, you were served wine, and you went along with it. It wasn't a big deal. This is, of course, inside a house setting. You weren't allowed to go clubbing or anything, but this is in a house setting. You were allowed to drink. But again, a very small part of Sri Lanka. I would say a very small part of Colombo in general.
Yeah, that's very true. I'd say, yeah. There is such a, I don't know how to say it, is a disparity between the richest of the rich and the poorest of the poor in Sri Lanka.
Yes, there's that. There's also the fact that we have a different culture in general because we can afford said culture. But we're judged on the fact that we drink alcohol. Let me point that out.
You as in...
It's like when you go to a private school, you're judged. It comes with going there. People just assume that you're extravagantly rich and that you do things that are maybe, I don't know, not morally right or whatever. Mm-hmm. But, it's not like everybody in school was rich. For example, I would argue that I'm upper middle class, so I'm not rich, but I can most definitely afford private schools. But we were judged because Sri Lankan women don't drink alcohol, and what are you doing drinking alcohol, and stuff like that. So what we did in closed society. You do not do that in the open because you would get judged.
What is a piece of advice that you, right now, would give past Ash, right before she came to Canada to come to UofA, let's say?
Oh, so many. Don't be nervous. I was really nervous mostly because, I was going to a place I didn't know anybody in. And don't be nervous. Also, just talk to everybody. Like, I know that right now a lot of us just stare at our phones most of the time in class. Like, that's what I do. If I go to a new class, I don't talk to people. I'm just staring at my phone because I already have friends. I don't need to talk to more people or whatever. But if you are an international student coming in, that's not what you should be doing at all. You need to make sure you talk to people in class because they're not going to talk to you. They already have people that they are friends with. So the only person who needs to make friends is you. You need to be the one to go up and talk to them. So maybe, learn to talk better and be less awkward. That would probably be the biggest thing I would tell myself. And just don't be so nervous about everything.
That's a great piece of advice. I really like that. The last question I have for you is, what is something that you will always remember about your time here at the U of A?
Okay, this is going to sound depressing, but this is what I remember the most because this affected me a lot, mostly because my life became significantly better after that. So I think, during the summer holidays, I was stupid enough to decide that I wanted to do my Chem 263 during the summer, which is a terrible decision. If you choose to do that, don't do it. So you essentially have lab every day and all of that, and it's just traumatizing. So I didn't have any friends in the class, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to still do it. And so the first class I went to, I hadn't done Chem 261 because I got an exemption. So I had zero lab experience with organic chem, so I go into lab and I don't know how to, do reflux, which is a part of a chem lab technique, and everybody else seems to know what they're doing. And the only other two people who didn't know what they were doing were these two girls who were, I think, on either side of me on my lab bench. And so I made friends with them because I was like, so I don't understand how to do this, do you? And so that's how I made 2 new friends there, and they've been 2 of my closest friends since then, and through them I've met 5 more. So basically after that my life became significantly better, and that summer was, apart from the traumatizing Chem 263 experience, was one of the best summers I had, so because of them. So that was, I think, the best part of my U of A experience. as of right now, which is, I know it sounds sad, but based on my perspective, when you go through university for, I think, 2 terms and you have 5 friends, and then suddenly you make 2 new friends and you're introduced to a bunch of others in a span of 3 months, that's an achievement. So that was the best time of my life in the UofA, at the UofA, which is during the summer of 2018.
That's awesome. Well, Ash, thank you so much for letting me interview you.
Thank you for having me.
I hope to talk to you again sometime soon. Thanks, Ash. Bye-bye. Hi, everyone. It's Calm again. I wanted to thank everyone for listening. I hope you gained some insights from Ash's perspective as an international student at the U of A. I really enjoyed interviewing her, so I wanted to say thank you to her as well again. Anyways, thanks for listening, and I hope to connect with you all again soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.